Welcome back to the second video for the low FODMAP diet treatment. And in this video, we're going to look at understanding the low FODMAP diet. Before we get going, I want to really recommend a video that you can watch on the internet. If you type in the FODMAP Grand Tour Down Under, you'll find an extremely good video produced by Monash University, which is the home of the FODMAP diet. And I really recommend watching that because it'll give you some good background information on the plumbing issues that are caused in the gut by irritable bowel syndrome, and will explain the background to the diet really well. Monash University also have an app, although it is very based on Australian foods. King's College London used to have a UK app, but unfortunately it's not available at the moment. I would suggest that you're going to get all the information you need from these low FODMAP diet treatment videos. So at the moment, perhaps hold off on using the app at this stage because it may cause confusion due to the differences in the foods. So what does FODMAP stand for? Well, FODMAP stands for some horrible long words: fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. But in simple terms, what we're saying is that FODMAPs are a type of dietary carbohydrate which the human body finds difficult to absorb. Simple as that. Some of these FODMAPs cause water to move into the small intestine, and this extra water will then mix with your poo. So if you've already got soft poos and you add extra water, you're going to end up with very loose stools. And in some people, these foods, FODMAPs, get fermented by the gut bacteria in the lower intestine, and this fermentation can cause the gas and the wind, and that can result in bloating and stomach pain and discomfort. So to give you some examples to try and make it more understandable what we're talking about. So there's a picture of prunes at the top here. Now prunes are a FODMAP food. They cause water to enter the small intestine. Now this is really useful, of course, if your stools are hard and constipated, and that's why we give prunes to patients with constipation. But of course, giving prunes to somebody who's already got soft stools is really not going to help because it's going to add more water into their already soft stools and give them diarrhea. Baked beans, another example. So baked beans ferment in everyone's guts. We always hear the term beans means farts, and that's because they ferment, cause gas and wind, and depending on how sensitive you are, you may produce more wind than other people. So baked beans and prunes, really good examples of FODMAPs. So understanding how the low FODMAP diet actually works. One of the questions I get asked a lot, and this may ring true for some of you watching this, is why can I eat a particular food on one day and suffer symptoms, and yet I can eat exactly the same food on a different day and it has no effect on me at all? And this is what a lot of people find really confusing, and it makes it very difficult for them to discover which foods are causing a problem. Well, I've got an answer to that. So I want you to think of an analogy. I want you to think of an overflowing bucket, okay? So every time you eat FODMAP foods, you may be adding FODMAPs into your bucket. Now, while your bucket is filling, you might have no symptoms or very low level symptoms. But when you eat too many FODMAPs in a short space of time, then your bucket may overflow, and that's when the symptoms appear. So to give you an example, somebody would say to me, look, I ate beans last week and they were absolutely fine. But I had beans this time in a different meal and they caused terrible symptoms. So here are the beans. Why? Why is that a problem? Why can I have them one week and not another? So looking at this food, you can see I've got some red arrows here. It's not just the beans that are high FODMAP here. There are several dishes here that are high FODMAP. So this meal does contain beans, but it also contains many other high FODMAP foods. So this meal in itself could cause your bucket to overflow, resulting in symptoms. And you end up blaming those symptoms on the beans, when in fact it's just that you've had too many FODMAPs in a short space of time, filled your bucket up, overflowing, and now you've got symptoms. So each person's level of tolerance is different, with some people suffering symptoms with very few FODMAPs, while others need to eat a lot of FODMAPs before they start to suffer symptoms. So it's really personal. So what do you do? Now you know the background. What do you actually do with regard to the FODMAP diet? Well, there are two different approaches with the FODMAP diet. You can do what we call a top-down approach, where you restrict all the FODMAP foods for 4 to 8 weeks, and then you do reintroduction to find your personal level of tolerance. And the emphasis there is really that you return to a normalised diet in the long term. The second approach is called a bottom-up approach, and this might be where you just reduce a few of the high FODMAP foods or target specific FODMAP foods for a limited time period, and further restriction is only used if you don't see an improvement with this approach. So with a bottom-up approach, we might look at different ideas and see if any of these ideas help. So you could look at particular fruit that appear in the FODMAP diet, and are you eating too much of one particular fruit and could you cut it down? So for instance, I've had a patient who was eating a lot of apples. He was having stewed apple on his porridge, he was having apple juice, he was having fresh apples at other times during the day. We just cut out the apples and all his symptoms went away. So for him, a bottom-up approach looking at one particular food was sufficient to solve the problems. You could look at whether you suspect milk and lactose, and you could try simply swapping your ordinary milk and yogurt for lactose-free milk and yogurt and see if that helps. Or you could look at garlic and onions and try cutting back on those. Those are particularly strong FODMAPs, and sometimes just cutting back on the intake of onion and garlic can help. And are you eating a lot of wheat foods? Try cutting down or swapping to other carbohydrates such as rice, potatoes, spelt sourdough bread, for instance. Simple changes like these may be sufficient for you to do the bottom-up approach and not need to do the full FODMAP diet. So if you do feel you need to do the whole low FODMAP diet, which the majority of my patients do, what we're looking at is we're removing strictly from the diet for 4 to 8 weeks all the FODMAP foods and then reintroducing them again in a stepwise fashion. Often the FODMAP effects are not down to the consumption of just one food, but the quantity or combination of FODMAPs eaten over a short space of time or on consecutive days. So going back to those pictures I was showing you earlier, it wasn't just about the beans. That meal where the beans appeared to cause a problem was because there were actually a lot of other FODMAPs in that meal. If you feel better after following the FODMAP diet for 4 to 8 weeks, then you must start the reintroduction process, and I'll talk about that in more detail later. But it's very important that you start the reintroduction process. This is not a long-term diet, and it can have a negative effect on the gut bacteria, so it's really important that you start the reintroduction process. If, however, you do not feel better after following the low FODMAP diet for 4 to 8 weeks, then simply return to your normal eating patterns. You do not need to follow the FODMAP reintroduction process. However, you may want to seek a one-to-one consultation with a specialist dietitian to look at other dietary approaches for your symptoms.